Morning, Rabbi.
Morning.
Good morning. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? We're going to learn a tshuva today from Rav Moshe Feinstein about unfair competition regarding a Beit HaKnesset, regarding a synagogue. And then I think with the conclusion of this tshuva, I think we'll be ready to move on to the next chapter, because we've seen a lot of different issues. Okay. Let's see. So everybody ready? Let's get started. Birur ta'amei hapsak din bidvar anashim. So Rav Moshe is going to clarify the psak din regarding men shaholchu mibeit knesset shel Rebbe echad shehitpalalu etzlo, regarding a certain group of people who left a particular shul of one Rebbe, the yasdu bigvulo beis hakneses acher, and they opened up another shul, al etzem halicha misham. So was it correct for them to leave there? The kipuach parnasaso, and was it correct for them to undermine his parnasa as a result? This tshuva is written in 1957. So let's take a look. And he says, Bidvar harebi, shetava me'elu shehispalalu etzlo, miyom shekana beis hakneses shelo, karav l'shalosh shanim. So here's the issue. There is a particular, it sounds like a Rebbe, like a Hasidic Rebbe, who had opened up a shtibel 3 years ago. He purchased it and he renovated it ostensibly, and he made it into a shul. V'achar kach yastu bigvulo beis hakneses acher, asher al yedei zeh hisigu gevulo. And then a group of balabatim went ahead and they opened up another shul right in the same neighborhood, the kafchu parnasaso, and so they took away thereby his parnasa, because when people would come and daven with him, they would donate to his shul, and that would be his source of income. V'gam hu zal shivoy beis hakneses shelo al yedei zeh. And not only that, but the real estate of his property has now gone down in value. Asher efshar l'mochro below hefsid gadol ma'od. Now he won't be able to sell this synagogue that he put together without taking a loss. Ki lebeis hamedrash eino shaveh klum. He says, because now that no one's attending his Beis HaMedrash, because they're going to a competing shul, it's very hard to unload a property like that, because it's been structured as a Beis Medrash, which doesn't have utility as readily as, let's say, a living property, a place for living. The renovations necessary to retool it, to make it like a living area instead of a shul area, would be exorbitant, and therefore nobody wants to buy it. Okay? Ki im lo hayu miyastim beis hakneses acher, kol misha hayadar sham va'af misha hayaba acher kach ladur sham hayamispal letzlo. He says, if the Rebbe's claim is as follows: if they would not have opened up their competing synagogue, then anyone who was living in this neighborhood would have come to his shul, and anyone moving in would have come to his shul. He says, and even though when this Rebbe came into town, there already was another shul, but that other shul, he claims, is not consistent with the way that the Haimish Chevra, the really Hasidic group of Balabatim, would like to daven. But now, that this new shtibel has opened up, all of the chashuva balabatim. In other words, maybe the other shul that was in the town, this is in Brooklyn, as we'll see in a second, there was a shul in Brooklyn, but it was like a young Israel, right? So it was more of the American style. This Rebbe came in and started a shtibel, and he thought that everyone was going to come to him. But they decided after 3 years of davening with him, they were going to open up their own place. And now he's claiming that all of the Haimish Chevra, if anyone doesn't understand what I mean by that, please speak up. I just want to make sure that you understand. Everyone from the Haimish Chevra has left his shul and has gone to this new shul, the Heim Heshivu. So what is the counterclaim? What do these Balabatim argue? Ki lo haya efshel lahem lispal bebeis hakneses shel Rav zeh, mitzad shinuyim benusach uvenigun hatfila, asher hu bilbul gadol lahamispalalim shelo hurgalu bazeh. So the first claim that they make is that this new Rebbe and his shtibel presents us with differences in nusach that we're not used to, and the nigunim that he uses are nigunim that we're not used to. It doesn't provide us with a pleasant davening experience. V'gam mitzad shedarko shel harav lekalel ulahavchiru levazos kamo she'ira ize pa'amim shezeh kasher lisbol. And the second thing that they say is, this is going to be surprising, is that this Rebbe has a tendency to curse and to frighten and to insult from the pulpit. And this has taken place many times, and it's very difficult for them to tolerate. V'gam she'eza mehat mispalalim sham zilzulu es ra. So v'gam she'eza meha mispalalim sham zilzulu es rabam hatzadik she'efshar lahem lisbol zeh. And there are many people who daven there that the Rebbe has insulted their Rebbe. Okay, in other words, he speaks disparagingly about a Rebbe that they are very fond of. We don't know, we can only conjecture what reference is being made to, but two different brands of Hasidus, and this is not palatable to them. And therefore, they felt perfectly justified in opening up their own shul. And furthermore, they claim that they did absolutely nothing to lure the regular members of that Rebbe Shtibel to come to daven with them. He says, and the Rebbe counterclaims that no, he's been at peace and it's been a loving relationship with all of the people who used to daven with him. He says, the only time that I gave a fiery speech was there was one time when I felt I needed to save myself from slander because someone had said something disparaging towards me, and it came out from their Rebbe, and I felt I needed to defend myself, and I gave a fiery speech. Upam shasheni lo haya inin havchada rak hisorus ba'alma shekol echad tzarich rachamim. The second time I spoke harshly, he says, was not to frighten the people, but I was trying to arouse them to tshuva, that we all need divine mercy. V'yoser lo haya shuv chirchure dvarim beinehem. And there was never, ever, besides those two instances, anything provocative that I said that should have spurred these people to say, we're out of here. Okay. So that's the shaila. So what do you say before we see Rav Moshe's response? Let's hear what you have to say. If you were davening in such a shul, or let's say, forget, you're not davening, you're the judge, and these two groups come before you. The Rebbe of the Shtibel says, look at what these people have done to me. 3 years ago, I came into this neighborhood. Everyone came to, all of the Haimish Yidden came to daven at my Shtibel. And all of a sudden, a Maisa Satan, as they say, an act of the Satan. And someone decided they were going to open up a new shul. And now my shtibel has emptied out. I have no parnasa. I have no way of even selling my shtibel because no one's going to want to buy it. I'm going to have to take a loss on it in order just to unload it. What's a guy supposed to do? So what do you say? Anybody?
So, Rabbi, I would say, okay, we came in at the same time. So my comment would be that if it's accurate that what the people claim, then it's I don't see any issue with it. If he was very critical and made people feel uncomfortable, I don't see any issue.
But his claim, of course, is that there were only 2 times when I spoke harshly. One was where my name had been dragged through the mud and I needed to defend my name. And number 2, I was trying to give musar so that people would do tshuva. And how's it, what, a rabbi is not allowed to be critical of his flock out of a fear that maybe they're going to spurn him? I mean, what is that? Is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? So what do you say? What do you say, Chevra? All right, so it's tough. It's tough making a decision like this, right? So let us go back. Anyone else want to comment on this?
What does the previous Rebbe want for compensation?
It sounds like he's trying to either stop them from opening the shul, or he's asking for damages. It's unclear, but he took them before either Rav Moshe's based in, or Rav Moshe was asked to offer his opinion about what was correct. And remember, this is 1957 is when this tshuva is when this scenario opens, when he writes this tshuva. So this is probably, a bunch of survivors who came from Hungary or from some other Hasidic community in Europe. They're very used to a certain way of davening, probably people who are just putting their lives back together. So very different world from what we have today, right? Okay. Hanachon lanias daiti. So Rav Moshe says, what is correct in my opinion, shalohaya reshus lo lahem v'lo l'shum adam liyased beit hakneset acher b'makom hasamuch. He says, in my humble opinion, he says there was no right for anyone to open up a competing synagogue anywhere nearby this Rebbe. He says, certainly, many of the people who were regular patrons of his, the he says, now these people who would have normally gone to him are going to go to the new shul. And this is an isser of ani hamahapech b'charara. Like basically, this guy has staked out the neighborhood, opened up his shtibel, and now that they've opened up a competing shtibel, it's ani hamahapech b'charara. Like the poor man who's prospecting on the garbage heap. The yored le'umnas chavero, and you're now invading someone else's parnasa. Kimavur b'chasam soifer chelek aleph Choshen Mishpat siman samach aleph. In a situation where the market will not tolerate 2 people having the same business, the Chassam Sofer does paskin, contrary to what we've been learning all along. Remember, we've been learning all along that free enterprise is the prevailing attitude, in that when you have when 2 people are appealing to the public, it's perfectly fine for another person to put up a shingle, and he basically the attitude is, you sell your stuff, I'll sell my stuff, and it's fair game. But there are limitations. If the opening of the second store will cause ruination, or such a reduction in the first person's parnasa that he won't be able to sustain himself, then that's not okay for the second person to open up. Af lebar maseh, af l'Rav Huna b'Rebbe Yehoshua b'Bava Basra daf chaf aleph, b'huva pischei tshuva siman kuf nun vav sifkat and gimel. Even according to Rav Huna b'Rebbe Yehoshua, who we said is the more lenient opinion that two store owners can open up, a second store owner can open up. And by the way, we saw this Gemara last week. He says, and even though you can argue, well, he still has a minion, he still has people that still come daven with him, but Kevin shuhuktan haminyan kolkach ad she'en lo kidei chayav, he says, but since that small group of people that still daven with him is not enough to sustain him, and his shul's membership has been reduced significantly, then this is certainly a reduction of the parnasa of his shul, and therefore for that he's of this balabayas, and therefore it's aser. Umefurash kain barashi b'v'metzia daf ayin aleph divrei mastel yored da afrak lemait mizonoso shel chavero aser b'din yored le'umnos chavera. He says, even to reduce your friend's parnasa, not to eliminate it completely, but just causing a reduction of his parnasa is invading someone else's business. Mishum delamait mechdei chayev hu kipisuk legamri. Because listen, let's say a person's living expenses is $1,000 a month. When he had when he was the sole business owner in the neighborhood, he was able to cover his business expenses. But now that a competitor has opened up, he's only able to make $750 a month. Well, how's that going to help him? With the argument, well, I'm not completely taking away your parnasa, I'm only partially taking away your parnasa. But if I don't have enough to cover my expenses, so then that's still that's not sufficient, right? And he says, and it's clear, says Rav Moshe, that what does it mean that you have to give a person what he needs to sustain himself? A middle income person. If this is he's used to a certain standard of living, and now he's got to downsize completely, then that's a violation. He says, is that I'm not sure what Rav Moshe is making reference to, that this is a proof, but he says that the rabbis permitted to lend money to non-Jews for interest in order to be able to let a Jew make a living. And furthermore, if a person can't cover his overhead, then he's going to have a reduction in his being able to live and feed his family. And so this is a problem, says Rav Moshe. Now, before we walk away from this, we have to look at some of the particulars of this case, and let's see what Rav Moshe continues with. He says, "V'kol shekein hacha shemiyaste beis hakneses ha'acher eino laharvacha." He says, and I'm going to give you another argument. He says, when they opened up the new shul, it was not to provide parnasa to anyone in particular. Whereas in the original Beis HaKnesses of this Rebbe, this was his source of parnasa. He thought, I'll put up a shingle, I have a shtibel, people will pay membership, and this will be my source of parnasa, so that I can at least have something to feed with my family with. They open up this new shtibel, everyone donates, and now there's no objective to make money now. Sheyoser aser. He says that's even more problematic. They're not even charging membership. Kichol hatam shemater Rav Huna b'reider Rav Yehoshua levar mavua didehu mitam ata osa b'soch shalcha v'ani osa b'soch shali. He says because remember that more permissive opinion that allows someone of the same neighborhood to open up his own business is because the attitude of the second guy is you get your customers, I'll get my customers, and I'm not invading your space. You won't invade my space. Shehu mitam sharishon gamkein lo hayalo rishus leser alav lekavcho milaharviach me'esek kazeh. He says basically the argument is the second guy is entitled to make a profit, so the first guy doesn't have a right to stop him from opening up his own business and earning a parnasa. V'lo shayich zeh ba'osa hasheni shelo laharbacha. But let's say the second guy is opening up and is giving away merchandise for free. He says, "Shenimsa shaharishon eno mekapcho beklum, v'hasheni mekapeach larishon." He says, in that situation, the first one is not taking away anything from the second guy because the second guy is not interested in making money, and it's only the second guy who's taking away from the first guy. And so even according to the more permissive opinion, there's no parity here. There's no equity. And therefore, in this case, it sounds like we should be more stringent because the new shul is not doing it in order to generate income for anybody. The only heter is given that you can't stop a second guy from opening up shop because he needs to make a parnasa too. But let's say the second shul is not doing it to earn parnasa, right? So therefore, it's even more problematic, he says. V'yoser mizeh matzinu b'yoredei sof simin reish memhei berav shemuter mitzad kinasofrim l'lamed l'rabim av sheyesham rav. Now, what are you going to tell me? In simin reish memhei, it says that one rebbe is allowed to open up a yeshiva next door to another rebbe, because Talmud Torah is we want to increase it and make it available to everyone. He says, but you're not allowed to, in the process, take away the parnasa of the first Rebbe who's teaching, who's got his yeshiva. Va'af b'dvarim shehu pras sha'anu boshin. Kimo migitin v'chalitza nami kasav hashach sivkatan tesvav shemitzad haminhag efsher yesh linchos bazeh. He says it could also be that when it comes to taking away the parnasa of a certain rabbi, even when he gets compensated for unseemly behaviors. In other words, not unseemly, but rather he gets compensated for presiding over cases that are unfortunate cases, like for Gittin and Chalitza. The Shach also writes that the minhag, based on the minhag, you should not allow someone new to come in to prevail over those cases. Va'ayri hasam berav shelo kibluhu kipoel l'shalem lo binyane hachnasa elu. Kimafurish Badarki Moshe Shamu uve Truma Sadeshan Simin Kuf Chava Simin Kuf Chavches. And he says, and it's talking about a case over there where they're not paying him a regular salary, but he gets compensated for every case he presides over. Umashakasav Baramakon Shahakol Kiblu Harishon Alehim Larav. Kavanasa rak shekibluhu lekaro rav umimela hayunosim lo kol echad sheitriach oso begitin uchadoma hapras hakatzuv al zeh. He says, and basically the rabbi would get paid for every service that he would perform for the community. And now that there's this new guy who's also a Talmud Chacham and he's come into the community and he's offering the same services, this first Rav does have a right to lodge a protest that he is edging in on his turf. Va'ayin b'chasam sofer, yoredeya siman reish lamed, shebisachruhu kepoyel, af midina asa lekapcho af beprasta gitinu chadoma. And that's only when the first rabbi was not contracted by the community. But when he was contracted by the community and sustained with a salary, even though he gets more per case that he presides over, that's certainly going to be usher when he can't now do those services. Abol bizman hazeh shemekablim v'oker diraso mimakomo ubolakan. Pashut shalav dafka oker diraso she'ein chaluk desocher poel im hu me'oso makom o oker diraso mimakom acher. He says that the Chassam Sofer also says that it's not right when people come from out of town and they come. He says, but v'kol shekain bekan shelo shayach bevate knesios heter dikin asofrim v'gam ha'achnasos mibeis hakneses hein beheter gomer she'asur la'acherim lekapcho. And he says, so certainly in this case, where you're not generating more Torah study by opening up another synagogue, he says that doesn't apply in this case, where it might have applied in the case of another rabbi coming to town and more people will come to study Torah. And furthermore, all of the expenses that went into opening this original Beis HaKnesses were done completely on the up and up, and therefore it's completely forbidden for anyone else to try and take away that right of collection. It's one thing, perhaps, when there was an argument that perhaps the way that the Rav was making a parnasa was over the tragedies of people where he was charging for every get that he had to preside over. But here you can't even make that argument that he was making money off of other people's misery. Here he did everything on the up and up, this rabbi. But we're still in the middle of the tshuva. We'll have to finish it Amir Tzashem tomorrow. I have to get going. So basically, Rav Moshe is siding with the first synagogue and is coming down hard on these balabatim. Let's see if there's any qualification by the time we get to the end of the tshuva, and we'll continue tomorrow, okay? And then after we finish this, I think it's time for us to move on. All right.